AI right now is leading to a lot of layoffs, I would hypothesize. There's different points of view on that. Data shows about 55,000 layoffs last year, directly attributed to AI. January, 7% of layoffs directly attributed to AI. But I think there's a lot of consternation here. So if layoffs break trust, let's listen to this quote from Mark Benioff. He said he fired last year almost half of his customer service staff. And he said, quote, "I need less heads because of the benefits and efficiency of our AI agent force. We've seen the number of support cases we handle decline and no longer need to actively backfill support engineer roles." How do you keep the trust of your employees if you're publicly announcing that you're firing them and bringing in robots?
Sure. I think that the two things that come to mind are, one, layoffs don't necessarily break trust. It's the way that we navigate those sorts of decisions is right. That they're Bob Chapman at Barry Waymiller, they talk about the way that they've handled some tough cycles in the manufacturing space. And so I'd say that the starting point, without any critique for the gentleman who shared that quote, I don't think of people as heads. I think that is the starting point, is what do we believe about ourselves? What do we believe about people? Because I can tell you that no matter how many children that individual has, they don't call them heads, right? These are sons and daughters of someone. And so when we think of them as people, it doesn't mean that we aren't going to have to make tough decisions, whether it be exiting someone from the team or whether it be laying someone off. But how do we treat them as we'd like to be treated, which I talk about transparency. How do we share openly that this is a decision, this is where the business is heading, and these are some choices we've made, and how do we care for people in the midst of recognizing that their job does maybe have some obsolescence? How do we care for them and how do we support them, whether they remain in the business or whether we help them move on to the next chapter of their career? That language is just entirely different. When I say people matter, we're not talking about heads and, of course, head count and FTEs. Those are important pieces of business, but I think what underlies it all is recognizing that people matter more. And as we chase after performance, how do we care for and articulate, be transparent to the people who have helped us get to this point?
It's just an interesting day and age that we're living in, because that sounds good, but everything now feels data-driven, AI-driven, innovation-driven, and it seems like there's this space race, and if you don't finish first, you finish last, it feels like.
Yeah, it's one way of looking at it, and I would just say that most people with the right information are reasonable. That my hope is that when I make a decision and I articulate to the team, that a huge majority of the people would respond and say, I'd have made that decision if I was in his shoes, or if I had this information. I understand where he's coming from. And there are other people who would say, I just wouldn't call them heads. I wouldn't think of them in that way. And so, well, the data is important, and well, AI is important, and well, there are roles that become obsolete. This is not new. That there used to be 150 people shoveling, and today a caterpillar does that work in 3 hours. So let's not act like sometimes the danger of well, we have never seen anything like this before. We have the automobile in a way that we didn't have the automobile 100 years ago. And so I think that sometimes we can think we're facing new problems, and then we can kind of use it as an excuse to just care for ourselves rather than sitting down and saying, hey team, we used to have 10,000 customer inquiries or service issues. Now we have 1,000, and we need to decide what to do as a business to continue to scale and to grow performance and to increase profitability. And yet we also want to care for our people because that's central to who we are. So anyway, that's a little bit of a rant, but I just think that it's a different way of looking at people and problems.
Yeah. Well, and I think in this social media world, people tend to maybe get riled up. I mean, I'll just give you another example from last month. The Washington Post announced that it had lost $100 million in the previous year, and they were going to lay off 1/3 of their staff. And it seemed like the internet was angry that the Washington Post was laying people off, saying, well, Jeff Bezos makes a lot of money. Why can't he just pay the staff the same? It's like, well, we just lost $100 million.
Sure.
Some things need to change.
Yeah, and again, having that conversation, not everyone's going to deduce the same thing. It's possible that the vision should be different, and that after losing $100 million, we should hire 200 more people to grow the business. I don't know the specifics of that, but everybody's going to look at losing $100 million differently. But I think when we can bring people in and we can share with them that it's not sustainable to lose money. Right? You cannot lose money in a business consistently any more than you can lose blood in a human body. And right, eventually that comes at a real cost and ultimately leads to death. And so when we talk openly about that, and not only, hey, we've decided to reduce our staff by this many, we're apologetic. We're going to give you exit pathways to allow you to then transition to an organization that isn't losing $100 million. And also that the people who are remaining and guiding the Washington Post in this example are going to seek to get this business profitable so that maybe we hire people again, or at least we are on a pathway with some level of sustainability.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And again, it sounds like it all comes down to trust. Do your people trust you? Do they trust the data? Do they trust the vision? And I think that's where, at its core, I know if my kids love me, if my kids know that I love them, they're going to be much more open to the constructive criticism.
And it really, underneath trust, I think that the word trust, even, which has a lot of definitions to it, is, would you look out for my best interest? If I wasn't in the room and I knew you were making a decision that affected my future, would I trust that you would look out for me? And so that's really what comes to mind. Underneath trust is leading from identity, is ultimately treating people as you'd like to be treated, or more importantly, treating them as they'd like to be treated. We sometimes overcomplicate, like, how would you feel and what would you like if you were the person who was going to be exited because of loss of revenue? It doesn't, no one is going to say, you're losing $100 million, you should just keep me on forever, or at least nobody reasonable. But how would you like to be treated through that valley of a season of life?